Okay, we're continuing with the book Hidden History of Health by me, Pete Rogers. It's also the history of science and nutrition. And one of the things I threw in here was a timeline of cultural history, because it's been my experience that especially young people, they're complete ignoramuses. You know, when I was at college, my first year at Stanford, we had a full year of Western civilization every single day. It was a lot. So we read all the great books, and I didn't fully understand them at the time, but I went through all the Greeks, the Romans, the history of Europe, the history of the West, okay? Whereas young people nowadays, they don't kind of know anything. And what I see society, the Western civilization is collapsing. It's descending back into barbarism. All these third world populations are being trafficked in, and they don't behave the way Western civilization behaved. No appreciation for art, literature, architecture, and then the young people are total ignoramuses, so they're basically like savages. And you have all of society deteriorating, becoming more violent, becoming more stupid, more ignorant, more illiterate. So anyways, you don't have to be that way. And I'm just going to share with you, up until 1900, anybody with a brain in their head knew that if you want to be educated, sophisticated, you have to know the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Otherwise, you're not an educated, sophisticated person. You might be good at science or something, but you're basically a Philistine. You know, that means sort of an uncultured barbarian. All right, so I'm just going to tell you, this what I'm saying is not like some unique opinion. This would be taken for granted by anyone in Europe or who was educated in the United States before 1900. They started phasing out Latin and Greek components of education around 1900, and that was part of the equivalent of the billionaire perverts of that time to de-educate the masses, to de-Christianize the masses. Because if you want to push somebody into slavery, one of the very useful things to do is prevent them from getting educated. Okay, so anyways, if you study culture, art, literature, and everything, you'll see, the cavemen had art, okay? The Christians are by far the best at painting, art, literature, culture, architecture, all that stuff by far. 99% of good painting and sculpture comes from Christians. Okay. In the ancient world, Aristotle used to say there are two types of people, or two types of cultures. There's the Greeks and there's barbarians. Okay. They considered anybody non-Greek was a barbarian. In a sense, I'm like the modern Aristotle, and I would say there's Christians and there's non-Christians. Non-Christians, they can be super smart, first in their class academically, but usually they don't have knowledge of the Bible or of art, literature, and all this other stuff. There's plenty of exceptions, but in general, that's true. Aristotle said that he was most happy about three things. First, he was happy that he was a man and not a beast. Second, he said that he was happy he was a man and not a woman. Aristotle thought that women were inferior to men. And then third, he said he was happy that he was a Greek and not a barbarian. Now, I, of course, would never say women were inferior, especially while my wife was in the room. I would never mention, out of the top 1,000 painters, none of them are women. But, there's reasons for that, too. Back in the old days, before birth control, women were all having about 10 kids, 10 or 15 kids. I'm re-listening to the history of England during the Victorian age by Patrick Allett from thegreatcourses.com, and he said it was routine for the Victorian wives to have 10 to 15 children. Bach, the great composer, Johann Sebastian Bach, he had 22 children. Only about half of them survived to adulthood. But if a woman's having 10 to 20 children, she's busy. Okay, she doesn't have time. And Goethe had said, lots of women were very promising scholars at all kinds of things, musicians, but as soon as they started having babies, they just no longer compete with a man who is practicing full time. So that's true. Women tend to be better at writing, but that's also because they talk a lot. But they've had some great writers. Jane Austen, Margaret Mitchell, Ayn Rand, Ann Coulter, for example. The bottom line, though, is men, we like women a lot more than women like men. Women only like high-level men. They don't like regular men. They think all men in general, regular men in particular, or low-life men, they think they're disgusting and kind of smelly and big and scary and vulgar. We just like women. We like the sign. Even if they're not cute, we like them. I like when a woman's in the room. Even if I'm not attracted to her, I still like having women around. I just like women. We can't help it. We're programmed to like them, and we're programmed to be nice to them. Whereas women are not programmed to be nice to men. They're programmed to trick men and manipulate them. Let's see, what else? But man, if we could buy kids at a pet shop, women would lose a lot of money. If we could get one of those artificial intelligence female robots to cook and clean for us, women would be in trouble. Let's say, and then women got the big pituitary. If you look at an MRI, a sagittal midline MRI, you can see it from across the room. Their pituitary is like twice the size of a man, and it goes with their menstrual cycle. And that's why they're so emotional. And everybody knows women are more emotional than men. Just look at their face. With a guy, what I say, looking at you, if I cover my face, it makes no difference. With a woman, though, she's making all kinds of little gestures. Her eyelashes are moving. She's raising an eyebrow, tilting her head, doing all kinds of little things, talking with her emotions in her face. That's why on a telephone, the woman has a big advantage on the guy, because what he says is the same on the phone as when he's in person. Whereas with her, if you can't see her face, you really don't know for sure what she's saying. And here's the great female writer from England, Charlotte Bronte. She said, "It's better to be without logic than to be without feeling. How cruel you are. Your veins are full of ice water, but mine are boiling." Yeah, in private, women are like wildcats. My wife, she's like a tiger in the kitchen, but when it's just me and her, bossing me around, all these things. But in public, she's all quiet. Classical antiquity was ancient Greece and Rome. The Golden Age was in Athens, like around 400 BC. Hellenic to historians, it's sort of like the time of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Hesiod's Theogony of the Gods, Herodotus and Thucydides. The playwrights, you had all kinds of great stuff, the Greek playwrights. Okay, I'm not going to go into all that. Archaic Greece was before 500. Classical Greece was about 480 to 323 BC. The Macedonian era, Alexander the Great, King Philip, about 338 to 323 BC. That's when Alexander the Great died, 323 BC, and Aristotle was chased out of Athens. Then the Hellenistic age came after that until the death of Christ. You had the Roman monarchy, then the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic is sort of the most interesting thing, with Cicero, Crassus, Pompey, Mark Antony, Julius Caesar. Then came the Roman Empire. The best thing about the Roman Empire is then came Christianity in Rome. There was Octavian, Augustus, Caesar, Nero, Marcus Aurelius, Constantine. The Catholic Church coexisted with paganism for about 500 years, from 33 AD, the death of Christ, to about 530 AD. So it's syncretic. It's sort of adopted. It's really comfortable with Catholicism. Catholicism is really comfortable with paganism. It's comfortable with any culture. That's why you can have a Catholic culture and it very easily can mix with other cultures, because it's not very judgmental. It seeks to get along with people, to enjoy life. Much less uptight than the Protestant groups. But the Protestant groups give over their power and control to their secular ruler, their king, and then he secularizes it, and then the Protestant sect just disappears, like Anglicanism in England. Middle Ages from about 500 to 1400. There's always a little bit different ways to process this. You could talk about scholasticism in the 1200s. Early Middle Ages were about 476 to 1066 AD. That's when you had the Norman conquest by the French of England. Middle Ages, till the end of the Crusades. The late Middle Ages, with the fall of Constantinople to the Arabs, the Turks. And that's when you got Gregorian chants, monophonic, later polyphony, and you had all the advanced music. We had a Carolingian Renaissance with Charlemagne, who was crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD. He had the scholar Alcuin modernize all the schools, teaching the Bible. Teaching the Bible is always what gets the schools to start. And then once people read the Bible, they start becoming good at everything else. So that's why the Bible is like the beginning of education. The old proverb saying is, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Well, studying the Bible is the beginning of wisdom. You see it over and over. As soon as a culture starts studying the Bible in a serious way, their education level jumps way up. It happened in Scotland. It happened in Germany. It happened in England. It happened in the USA. It happened over here with Charlemagne and Alcuin, and areas like what we consider nowadays France. The Gothic Age, 1100 to 1400, and that includes scholasticism, sort of the Aristotelian perspective on Christianity with Albert the Great, then St. Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas sort of baptized Aristotle, and then the Aristotelian view had much more emphasis in Catholicism and in the school system, and that's what led to the start of the universities. early Italian Renaissance in the 1300s, like Petrarch rediscovering Cicero's letters and stuff. But middle Italian Renaissance was like the 1400s, and that had a lot of great stuff in it. But the high Italian Renaissance was like, late 1400s, 1500s with Raphael, Michelangelo, Pope Julius, all that. Protestant Reformation starting in 1517 with Martin Luther, his 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg, and then, the council and at the Diet of Worms, he said, "Here I stand, there I can do no other." Okay, and then he rewrote the Bible into the German vernacular. He would remove parts of the Bible too. He didn't like the Book of James, which talked about good works, not just faith alone, grace alone. Catholic Counter-Reformation, Last Judgment painting of Michelangelo, 1541. St. Ignatius, founder of the Jesuits, was a big part of that, and also all the paintings like Caravaggio and whatnot. Baroque was especially 1600s to about 1750. The classic music would be like Bach, Handel, Vivaldi, Telemann. The apex painting would be the Apotheosis of St. Ignatius by Andrea Pozzo, 1690. Take a look at that painting. Just type it into your browser. Apotheosis of St. Ignatius by Andrea Pozzo, P-O-Z-Z-O, 1690. It's one of the greatest paintings you'll ever see in your life. On a flat ceiling, he made it look three-dimensional. It's extraordinary. Rococo was big in France, 1720 to 1780, and then you get more and more push into neoclassicism, a return, neo-new, classical age, Greeks and Romans. Classical music just kept getting better and better, especially in Germany. Then you have the so-called Enlightenment, which is really kind of BS because it's really a neoclassical age, and these scumbags, the atheist scumbags of France, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, they just called it the Enlightenment, and they were proud of all the great scientists, but the great scientists were a bunch of devout Christians. Newton was a religious fanatic, okay? James Clerk Maxwell, super devout, etc. And then they insulted the Middle Ages by calling them the Dark Ages. So that was all sort of a propaganda term of Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, and the rest of their philosophes, atheist scumbags who destroyed France. And I hate, whenever I read a history book, and I read a lot of them, if I'm reading an art book, I read a lot of art books, and they start pretending that modern art is the same as real art, I immediately lose total respect for the author. And it's the same thing. If I read a book about history, and they sit there and they give high praise to Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau, and the rest of that group, then I lose respect for them. I understand why they do it, because there's peer pressure to do it, but those guys are scumbags. They destroyed France. France, had 50,000 heads on the ground because of all that nonsense. You can't run a civil society on atheism. You can't, because it says that life has no meaning and the individual has no meaning and no rights. And once you say that, what ends up happening is the powerful just brutalize the weak. It's obvious. It's so obvious. It's like saying 2 + 2. But regular people don't know that. And that's why it keeps happening again. And that's why we're headed towards more. We're headed towards a return to slavery. Because we've been dehumanized, de-Christianized. And atheism and neo-Darwinism, which is bogus, it's fake. Darwinism is fake. I'm an A+ student in the subject. It only explains microevolution, not macroevolution, which means origin of life and origin of complexity. And without that, it's meaningless, okay? It doesn't matter. But it's used as a creation story of atheism to justify atheism and a subsequent removal of all the individual's rights. And this is like kindergarten to anybody who knows history, but 95% of the public at least doesn't know history. So they're victim to all this craziness. Romanticism was sort of a reaction to the coldness of neoclassicism and the dryness of it. Just the Greek and Roman ways. They don't take you far enough. And the Greeks and the Romans were both pretty brutal. The Romans far more brutal than the Greeks, but still, you need Christianity. You need the message of Christ. Love thy neighbor, forgive each other, give each other the benefit of the doubt, be nice, 10 Commandments, all the stuff. You need that, or society just goes into the garbage can. And I read a lot about Germany. Germany deteriorated in the 1800s due to a lack of Christianity. And France had a lot of problems too. They weren't Christian enough, okay? They were too much into neoclassicism. Neoclassicism is good. It's great to learn from the Greeks and Romans, but they just can't take you that far on a personal level because they didn't get that far themselves. They don't have Christianity. Okay, Romanticism looked back to Christianity, the chivalry of the Middle Ages, sort of the noble masculinity of all that, and it's much more emotional. The so-called Enlightenment, the 1700s says, we go by reason alone. But you can't go by reason alone. You end up like, 1789 to 1794 in France, 50,000 heads on the ground, okay? You need to have emotion, and you need to have religion. Otherwise, you become a barbarian. It's true. 1800s, Victorian Renaissance, Catholic Revival, Belle Epoque, Gilded Age, Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in England. Okay, a lot of good stuff happened in the 1800s. 1800s is the cultural highlight of mankind. It's the high point. As Ayn Rand had said, it's aesthetic light years ahead of the 1900s. And now the 2000s were even worse. USA had its big move in 1776. USA, big move forward, 1776. France, big move backwards, 1789. Will Durant says that Europe was like ancient Greece compared to the United States being like Rome. They've also said that Paris was like Athens, okay, and Germany was sort of like Sparta. The modern era is from about 1914 to present. World War II was a disaster. It was like a suicide attempt at Europe, and it made people give up on a lot of neoclassical ideas, like what can one individual do in the face of what happens in the trenches, okay? And then you had the lost generation writer of just, losers, idiots, scumbags, alcoholics like James Joyce, alcoholics, street fighter, suicidal idiot lesbians like Virginia Woolf, suicidal maniacs like Sylvia Plath, just people you don't respect them, okay? For me to respect a writer, there should be some message in their life. They should have overcome a difficulty. Like I respect an intellectual journey like Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was like Ivan as a young man, then became like Alyosha. That's what you want. Somebody who did good. And, other guys are heroic like Hemingway, but he didn't have enough Christianity in his writing, and his writing kind of spirals into meaninglessness with just a style. Post-World War I art movements were all fake. The history was removed from the curriculum, and the students became more and more ignorant. Ayn Rand knew what she was talking about with romantic realism. Her book, Romantic Manifesto, is the best book about being a good writer, as well as Art of Literature by Schopenhauer. We had some great writers, Tom Wolfe, Kingdom of Speech, Michael Crichton, Dan Brown, but nothing like the 1800s. Okay, 1901 to present, the oil age. 1990 to present, the computer age. We're now in I guess you could call it the internet age or the digital age. 2030 we'll probably be back in slavery, hopefully not. Here's a good painting of a fox caught in a trap by Gustave Courbet. And the fox is Western civilization. Can we get out of this modern nonsense thinking with this hand, the left, that's leading us back to slavery? I hope we can, otherwise, it ain't going to be that good. Okay, here is, a nice painting by Norman Rockwell, Free Speech, okay? We need free speech. We need to get rid of censorship. People should be allowed to criticize famous people, rich people, important people, and people should have a fair debate. Without that, we're going to spiral down. Gordon Liddy wrote a good book called When I Was a Kid, This Used to Be a Free Country. If you want to know what USA used to be like in the 1950s, read that book. Gordon Liddy, When I Was a Kid, This Used to Be a Free Country. I can remember when I was a kid, America was so much better. Man, it wasn't even funny. It was proud of itself. It was a melting pot. Okay, that was good. Here is the repentant Mary Magdalene. All these like female homeless shelters, Mary Magdalene centers, they came from Christianity. The university system, the Gothic architecture. Nowadays, the women, they've got birth control, and it's leading them to spend their youthful years, instead of marrying and having a family, a lot of times running around being way promiscuous, getting venereal disease and lowering their SMV, and then they end up not having a family, or they only have one kid, and they regret it when they're older. Here's lost illusions. The majority of marriages end in divorce. This is what a guy feels like at divorce. The kids, the wife, the whole social network. Because guys don't have much of a social network. I certainly didn't. I was just working all the time. And then you see it all disappear. It makes you sad. Because guys hate it, because the system favors that. It's feminizing the whole country, and it's ruining the country. Okay, I know you're thinking, where's all the health and science? We're going to get to all that, but I just showed a couple paintings. Here's also another painting of divorce. The father says goodbye to the kids, and you don't see them too often. You don't see your kids too often after you divorce. Most guys don't. Here's Western civilization painting called The Lost Sheep by August Friedrich Schenk from 1873. And either they rally to the cross or the wolves are coming. The dogs will protect them for a little while, not much. And then they either rally to the cross or it's over. And that's where civilization is at right now. Here's a version of it, kind of similar in color, Anguish by Frederick Schenk again, 1878. It's a pretty spectacular painting as the West is dying. Okay, and here's another painting. I put this on the cover of this book. I love this painting. It's called The Wounded Angel. And basically, she's got blood on her wing. She's got a wound on her head, a bandage on her head. And two boys are carrying her. She's too weak to fly at this point. The boy in front looks very sad. He's given up on her. He's wearing his clothes of mourning like he's taking her to a funeral. Whereas the boy in the back's like, wait, we could still save her. He's looking out at the audience saying, why don't you help us? We could still save her. The angel represents Western civilization. In her right hand, she's holding flowers that are a sign of renewal and sort of Renaissance rebirth. It's not too late to save Western civilization. We don't have to descend into slavery. We don't have to return to barbarism. It doesn't have to be that way, but I believe that most people are too stupid to know what's going on, and the few who do know what's going on sort of have given up. Okay, so anyways, the flowers are called snowdrops there. That's it for an overview of a historical timeline. Now I'm going to get back to all this scientific stuff, but it's kind of helpful to have that as a backdrop, you know. And you basically, it's pretty simple. Ancient Greeks, up until Rome took over, then Rome collapsed, you know, like about 476 AD, became Christian in a strong way, 312 AD. Christ died 33 AD. Then you've got the Middle Ages. Then you've got the Carolingian Renaissance, 800 AD. You got Scholasticism. You could call that the Scholasticism Renaissance in the 1200s. And the Petrarch early Italian Renaissance in the 1300s. Then you got Italian Renaissance in the 1400s with the Medicis. In the 1500s, you got Michelangelo, Raphael, Pope Julius, the High Renaissance. Okay, then you've got the Counter-Reformation. Then you got the Reformation, then you got the Counter-Reformation, the Baroque, then the so-called Enlightenment, then the Romanticism, then the Great Golden Age of Europe in the 1800s, then World War I and the destruction, the chaos, the sadness, the interlude, World War II, and then, you know, post-World War II and all the computer, digital age stuff. That's basically how you categorize Western history, Western civilization. Anyways, hope you found that helpful.